The Atlanta Falcons looked really impressive last night in a win against the Buffalo Bills. And to me, it feels like this team is finally turning a corner. They have had talent for years, but in that time, it's felt like there's always been something holding them back, whether it was coaching or whether it was the quarterback. But now, to me, it feels like they've got a plan. They've still got that stable foundation, and they're finally building towards something. Let's start off here with, of course, the stars of the show in Bijan Robinson and Drake London. I'll start off here with Bijan. I feel like this year, a lot of us were projecting him to be very, very good, and that has absolutely been the case. With this past game arguably being his best one of the season. And it was also the biggest game he's played all year, against the Bills, who coming in this game, they were 4-1, and it's on prime time, national television, and Bijan, he did not shrink in the bright lights. He showed up and put together a performance the world could remember. And for me, I feel like Bijan had the best game out of those two because he did it in both the first and second half. Whereas London kind of slowed down the second, but Bijan, he was there the whole night. It was a very complete game for him, I felt like. In my opinion, when you were looking for a running back, it doesn't get much better than Bijan Robinson. It's like they made him in a lab in terms of he has a good frame to him, but he also has that speed. He has that burst. He has been efficient. He can do a little bit of everything for you. Bijan is arguably the perfect running back in terms of his archetype. Not only does he do a lot of things for you, he does a lot of things very, very well. And I think that's very important because you can have a jack of all trades, but it's another thing to have a master of all trades. And Bijan Robinson, he's as close as you can get to that, in my opinion. Then moving on, we have Drake London. And London is somebody who, ever since his rookie season, I've been very, very high on. But for those first couple of years, I felt like we all knew he had the potential. He had the talent to be a great wide receiver in this league, but he really didn't put it all together until last year, where he looked like the guy that I believed he could be, and 1,200 yards, 100 receptions, and 9 touchdowns. It was a very impressive season for him, and that was also in the midst of some turmoil at that quarterback spot because you had both Kirk Cousins and Michael Penix. And Kirk Cousins, he started off the year looking real good. I remember that game against the Buccaneers that he had. But overall, by the end of Kirk Cousins' tenure there as a starter, things were going really downhill in those past few games. And so then Michael Penix comes in, and yes, the talent's there, but he's unproven. He's a rookie. So London did not do that with perfect quarterback play, and now he's got a consistent, stable starter in Michael Penix. I think this could be a huge year for him. He's had a couple of big games here already, and that is firmly not by coincidence. I think Drake London has been great. I think he has all the tools to be one of the elite wide receivers in the league today. So that's your primary talent pool in terms of skill position players. This offense really goes for London, really goes for Bijan Robinson, and we saw that in this past game against the Bills. But why now? They've had these guys for years. Why now are they turning the corner? Why now are they finally putting it all together and becoming the team that they have had the talent to be for years now? First of all, I want to talk about the head coach because for years this was a massive point that people would look to and say that the Atlanta Falcons they need a new coach because Arthur Smith he just was not getting it done in Atlanta, and that was just multiplied by the fact that he had this high level of skill position players, and yet he still just could not piece it together to form a cohesive winning unit from week to week. But now they don't have Arthur Smith. They have Raheem Morris. And I think he has a lot of pedigree. Of course, he won a Super Bowl as the defensive coordinator for the Rams just a few years ago. And that, once again, was not by coincidence. This is somebody who's been coaching for a long time. And something that really impresses me is the fact that I think he's been a good head coach for the Falcons. But this is someone with very much a defensive minded background. He began his collegiate coaching career coaching defensive backs, and he did that in the NFL as well for teams like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Then, of course, being the DC for the Los Angeles Rams. But still, this team, I don't think of defense when I think of this team. And still, Raheem Morris has been everything he needs to be for them. And I'll tell you why I think that is. When you have a defensive coordinator, a defensive backgrounded kind of guy, when you have him go into a head coaching position, I think there's a higher floor for your team than there is with an offensive minded guy who has an offensive background. Here's why. Because when you have this guy with his defensive background come in, instantly he understands defense. He understands how to stop the opposing offense from putting points on the board. And so, therefore, no matter how well your offense does, you can trust your defense, and they're going to put you in good positions. Whether it's through turnovers, whether it's through stalling the other team, that defense is going to put you in good positions. And so, to have somebody with a good defensive mind, that that elevates the floor of your team because you have that base level of competency. You have the base level of competition, of competitiveness with your defense holding up. And from there, your offense can begin to flow. So that's why I think Raheem Morris has been a good fit. And then you compare that to, say, somebody with an offensive minded background. And then in that scenario, you can put up some good offensive numbers. You can put up big offensive numbers. But you might not have that fundamental level of defense down. And so you might end up in a high scoring affair that you end up losing. And you might have a lot of close games that you end up losing. And if you want examples out, look at somebody like Zach Taylor. You know, you think last year with the Cincinnati Bengals, everybody knew that that offense was electric. But yet, no matter how good they did in a given game, they could hardly stop the opposing team from scoring. So they would put up 40, but the other team might put up 42. And that's not a recipe for success. You have to have somewhat of a sustainable defense. And so that's why I think Raheem Morris has been a good transition as our overall head coach, even though this team I think of as a more offensive minded team. Morris has still fit in because of that defensive pedigree and the floor that it can bring. And then we get to some other point here, and this is the quarterback in Michael Penix Jr. I feel like you finally got some stability. You finally have a long-term future, a vision for that quarterback spot for the first time in some years now. Because whether it was Desmond Ritter or Taylor Heineke throughout that Arthur Smith era, it was not pretty. And there would be moments maybe where they had a solid game that never felt like that was going to be your long-term answer at quarterback. It felt like they were placeholders, but at the same time, you didn't really know who they were holding that place for. And even when you ask them to do small things, and trust me, I love Taylor Heineke. I remember his run over in Washington. It was really fun. It was really exciting. But even when you ask them to do not even very difficult stuff, I think back to Desmond Ritter especially, he was not put in a position where he had to be under a ton of pressure. He wasn't asked to do a whole lot, and he still couldn't do that at an efficient rate. So when you have guys who are really struggling to even be game managers, that's once again not a recipe for success. And then you bring in Kirk Cousins last year, and there were some fireworks, but by the end of that, it kind of burned out, and the turnovers he was having, that began to outweigh the touchdowns. But finally now you get to the point where you have Michael Penix Jr., and is he perfect? Absolutely not. There was, of course, this game in week 3 against the Panthers in which he threw for 0 touchdowns, under 200 yards, 2 interceptions. But other than that game, he's been pretty solid for the Falcons this year. And on one hand, a solid quarterback is something you have not really had in a long time. Kirk Cousins, I love him, but he was volatile at times, especially in that back part of his starting tenure. Desmond Ritter, Taylor Heineke, they were never really solid for the Falcons. So you finally have that. You have something sustainable there. And then also, this is somebody that you can envision being your long term, being your franchise quarterback. Because with Heineke, you weren't getting that. With Desmond Ritter, you were not getting that. With Kirk Cousins, with his age, you weren't quite getting that. But Michael Penix Jr., he's not only been a solid foundation, he's also somebody that you can look at as your foundation, as your quarterback to build around. And they have, of course, the skill position players in London and Bijan to do just that. So overall, the Falcons team, they just feel a little bit different to me this year. They're 3-2, and they're in a tough division given that they have to play the Buccaneers. And the Bucs at 5-1, they are probably going to be your division winners. But the Falcons, I think they can still be a great team. And finally, it feels like they're putting it all together. They've had that talent for years, but there's been some questions about their head coach, about their quarterback, and now they're finally putting it together. They've got Raheem Morris, who I trust. They've got Michael Penix Jr., who looks like the best quarterback they've had in many, many years. And this Falcons team is finally turning a corner.